Hello everyone, welcome along. This is a review of my favourite 20 photos taken in 2019. And you don't need me to tell you that 2019 was kind of that final year of normality before the world was turned upside down by COVID. As a result, I think that 2019 was sort of by far the best year I've had, certainly since 2019. 2020, 2021 and 2022 all impacted in different ways. I was very lucky in 2019. I got to do trips to Mysore, to Sri Lanka, to the Maldives, to the Philippines, to the Red Sea, to Cayman, back to the Red Sea again, back to Raja Ampat again, and to the Maldives, all in 1 year, amassing 318 scuba dives. And obviously the Sri Lanka trip was a snorkeling trip, so lots of underwater photography in that year, a lot more than I've managed since. I think all the years since almost don't add up to that sort of number. So really productive year, and it was really hard to choose a top 20. But I'm going to dive into those now and just show you a little bit. So let me just live bring this up. This is me shooting with Isabella in Cayman in the summer. You can see my usual underwater photography gear, not wearing a face mask and wearing sunglasses. Actually, it is probably worth a quick mention that actually when I'm at the sandbar in the Cayman Islands shooting stingrays, I often don't wear a face mask there. It's often easier to shoot the stingrays like this, and I'm actually wearing sunglasses, not to look cool, but actually this is actually ideal clothing and also ideal camera gear to be wearing in those very bright conditions. So hat for the sun protection for the head, and sunglasses, because actually it's so bright I find it's actually easier to look through the camera with the sunglasses on. It was a great year of adventures all around the place. There's some fun pictures of me. You can see my yellow Volo fins that I was wearing at that time. They're obviously very lucky fins. Maybe they need to be brought back out of retirement. I've been using white ones since the pandemic. So yeah, so maybe I need to get the yellow ones back since 2019 was clearly a very lucky year. Over on the far side there, you can see me with Martin Edge. That was a real highlight trip, not just of 2019, but of all my diving career, running a joint workshop with Martin Edge at Mysore Resort in Raja Ampat. There's a photo of me, the one of me where you can see my fins, let's say, at the middle. That's in the Red Sea because I was using the one underwater strobes on that trip, just trying those out. So easy to identify where that is. Then there's two photos of me in the Philippines on either side of this, one above me where I'm wearing the compulsory life vest on some journey, I think out to Apo Island or something like that. And then me on the bottom side. And we found this rather fetching hood on one of the dives. So that's me modelling the fancy hood in Analau. And then I'm again in a life vest again in the middle shot. And that shot there over there, if I can get my hand in the right place, that's shooting split levels at sunset in the Red Sea. And unlike the sandbar shot I just showed you, in the Red Sea we can't, the way the reefs are, there's no way to put your feet down. It's all living coral, so you need to be as buoyant as possible so you can lift that camera up. Obviously on the sandbar it's all sand, you can stand up there and take your split levels. Over coral reefs, actually the more buoyant you make yourself, the easier it is to shoot split levels over on the reef. And you can see actually me in the water there. I'm sitting nice and high in the water. My camera is got flotation on, so it's floating at that level. And we'll come back to that, because those, although I look silly in my life vest and all my gear in that shot, actually my favourite shot of this top 20 was a split level taken probably on that very dive wearing that very kit. So let's get into the top 20. I went to Raja Ampat twice that year, so had lots of opportunity to shoot pygmy seahorses. I have lots of well-known pygmy seahorse photos, but actually I'm not really someone who really sort of seeks them out, and particularly because I run workshop trips and other people want to shoot them, I actually relatively rarely shoot pygmy seahorses, but having shot them quite a lot, I guess I know what I like. And so I usually produce some quite nice shots, and I do a lot of super macros, so I don't find shooting pygmy seahorses particularly challenging. This is a Denise pygmy in what's often called the Raja Ampat colour form, sometimes called a Santa Claus colour form, where the Denise pygmy is red, and it's got quite noticeable tubercles on the body with white splotches on. Here on a Melothea fan, matching that coloration very well. I really like to try and get my pictures of pygmy seahorses with the fans with the polyps open. Sea fans don't have their polyps open all the time, but they certainly do close them when the fans are manhandled or the pygmy seahorses are. And so I always like shots where you have got the polyps out, because I think it shows that you've gone about things in the right way. I also really like pygmy seahorse shots to have plenty of negative space around the subjects. I think in the early days of pygmy seahorses, we were always all chasing higher and higher magnifications in our shots, and I think it's actually quite interesting for me to show pygmy seahorses how small they are. So I like to shoot them small in the frame, and that brings us to my favourite pygmy seahorse shot from that year. And this picture was awarded in the GDT European Wildlife Photographer of the Year competition, and that's this shot here taken on the house reef at Masul Resort of this pygmy here. And I shot this pygmy, I visited it fairly regularly, actually spotted it while shooting wide angle and then returned to it, and it was quite a long swim from the jetty, so it was quite not, it wasn't one that many people went to visit, and I was able just to spend time with it and make some images. And I really like this shot with the blue background, with the nice fan pattern nicely in focus across the frame. Shot on f/22 to keep all that in focus, shot on a 20th of a second to get that blue to burn in, and it does have a little bit of ghosting shadow from the sea fan in this, but I quite like that. It gives it a bit more three-dimensionality. It's a mistake, but it's a mistake that actually I like, and I had other shots without it, and I prefer this one with it, strangely. And shot on ISO 200, shot with the D850 Subel housing retro flashes. So let's move on now to my next favourite, number 19. This now is into the Red Sea, and something I always do a lot of in the Red Sea is shooting fish behaviour, and particularly fish spawning on the trips. These are a pair of slingjaw wrasses spawning. I like shooting the wrasse spawning because there's a big sexual dimorphism between the males and the females, the males being bigger usually and more colourful. And you can see the male here and the female. But this is the picture I've chosen as to be in my top 20 favourites. In at number 19, these broomtail wrasses spawning with the really big female and the really big male, on the right, and the small female. I think this picture looks really, really nice. Shot with a D850 again and the 105mm lens. Subel housing, C-cam flashes, f7.1, 1/250th of a second, ISO 200. Right. Now we're swinging around to the Cayman Islands, and one of the things that sort of the main memory I have of that Cayman trip was it was when I started working on this big project with my friends at Ocean Frontiers to do shots for them of divers on all their dive sites that they dive, and always taking pictures at very recognisable places on those dive sites, so that anyone who sort of had dived the site once would recognise straight away where the picture was taken. And so to kind of create a beautiful picture, but also a very recognisable one. It was a really interesting challenge, and the main model that I've worked with on that project is Sam, who's in the picture here. And so I have to sort of choose a favourite shot with Sam in. But actually my favourite memory of all that is when Sam and I were photographing on the Kittiwake, and at the end of the dive where I took the picture on the left here, as we were coming up to the boat, behind her, as we were swimming back to the boat, I spotted this mobula. It was huge. It was as big as a manta ray, and we thought it was a manta ray at the time because it was, it looked like a manta and it was as big as a manta. What is it? It's clearly a manta. And I was gesticulating to Sam there was a great big manta behind me, and she was like, "Oh my god, he wants me to pose yet again for another shot," and didn't realise what it was until she turned around to start going reluctantly, I think, at the end of the dive to pose. And then suddenly we had this amazing encounter with the mobula ray. And I even managed to get this shot here with the mobula over the Kittiwake, which was pretty cool. But my favourite shot from that shoot is this shot, which is not necessarily the most beautiful shot of the shoot, but I think I really love this shot because it's a really hard shot to shoot such a big scene with the light so well balanced between the ambient light and the strobe light. This is a really big amount of space to light up underwater, and takes real sort of finesse of technique to really be able to pull a shot off like this well, and not just end up with everything sort of badly lit and badly exposed. So this is shot with the D850 8-15 Subel housing, C-cam flashes, f13, which is pretty much what all my wide angles always end up shot with, because that's really the setting, as I explained in the other video, where those corners really are sharp and your depth of field is really good, so you kind of get that hyperfocal effect on most classic wide angle scenes. I had to go as slow as a 13th of a second to get this blue to burn in as brightly as that. And one of the aims of this shoot, one of the reasons we did it in the summer, was that it would look all warm, and obviously it was easy to dive. Sam's diving in a rash vest and shorts. I'm diving in a rash vest and shorts. Something else we saw when out looking for blue whales in Sri Lanka were this olive ridley turtle trapped in the net. This was just a grab shot, really. We jumped in the water to see what was going on under these nets. I took this picture as we were swimming towards it, and then I put my camera back on the boat, and Peter DeMact and I helped release this particular one from the net. I held the turtle while Peter cut the ropes, and we got it out. But my favourite shot is this one of a blue whale. I think it's one of the most amazing underwater encounters I've had. Blue whales, photographing them is a bit like photographing a locomotive train, in that they just keep going, and you just have to keep overtaking them, stand by the side of the tracks and hope it comes whizzing past. And as a result, you tend to get these flybys. They're not a very interactive species usually. You can make nice pictures of them out in the blue. They're incredible. Obviously the biggest animal in the world, so amazing to spend time with. But this encounter was really special to me because this whale was moving relatively slowly, and I was actually down below the surface and deeper than the whale. And blue whales look really big when you look down on them, but when you look up at one, gosh, they look huge. And this was just an incredible encounter. The whale really looked at me, I looked at it. It was kind of pretty chilled out, just kind of swimming past away, and it was just an incredible encounter. It's not an incredible photo. I mean, it's an incredible moment for me, so that's why it's into my favourites from the year. Right, 16, across to Lamu Atoll in the southern part of the Maldives, and this is a photo taken at the end of 2019. This is a nice group of sweetlips hanging out on the outer wall there, and this group was just really, really friendly, and I was able to get this sort of, by just hanging out with them, able to get this perfect split and symmetry in the school that I really like. This shot here was taken with the D850 28-70 WACP1 with the Subel housing and retro flashes, f13, 100th of a second, ISO 400. I didn't actually do the settings for the whale, I just realised. This was D850 Subel housing, Nikonos RS13mm lens. I like using that lens for the whales because first of all, it's a super sharp lens because it's underwater created lens, but also I think the small footprint of it makes it really easy to manoeuvre yourself through the water and get in position with it. Shot on f8, 1/400th of a second, and ISO 640. The other advantage of the RS lens is that I can shoot it more open. Right. 15 takes us to Raja Ampat, back to Missoul, exploring the reefs there. And I ran back-to-back workshops in the autumn of 2019, and they gave really good opportunities on the reefs there because it's the time of year in sort of October, November when we were there that the schools of baitfish really gather on the reefs, and it's not always the best visibility, but there's just so much life on the reefs. It borderline crazy. And it was absolutely phenomenal trip for wide angle. So many spectacular dives where there were just fish upon fish. You could hardly see the reef at times, and when you could see the reef, it was incredibly beautiful. But actually, and basically everywhere we went, there was just fish and fish and fish, and it was just a stunning trip. But this shot, I think, is my favourite from that wide-angle trip. A little less sort of spectacular in terms of that super biomass of the shots I previously showed. But I just like the elegance of this shot with the beautiful reef, the arc of Snell's window above, the bait fish filling the water above the reef. And it just sort of shouts Raja Ampat to me. And I really like the sort of S-shaped composition of this particular frame. That really, for me, works very well. So this is taken D850, 8-15mm lens. All the 8-15mm lenses are taken with the Zen 230 dome on this trip. It's for me, it's by far the best dome to be using with that lens on full frame cameras. You can use smaller domes, but you're always compromising corner sharpness when you do. So I really always like, and also the hack housing is very nice to handle with that nice glass 230 dome on. It's just completely neutral, sits in the water really comfortably. Subel housing, C-cam flashes, f13, no surprise there, 1/25th of a second, ISO 500. Right, now on back to the Maldives again, and this time in Ari Atoll, South Ari Atoll, here, and at one of the manta cleaning stations there. And I really like this picture because I think the manta is, well, any picture where you get to use a manta as background interest has got to be good. This was taken in really poor visibility, but I had this lovely school of these one-spot snappers. Are they one-spot snappers or two-spot snappers? I think they're one-spot snappers. The oriental sweet lips and a saber squirrelfish at the bottom. There's a couple of them in there actually, and then the reef manta behind. And I really like this picture. I really like the combination. You could make a much better version of this picture in nicer conditions. I have to say that this was a very nice shot considering the conditions, but I'm sure you could go back there 3 or 4 times and with the same opportunity get a much nicer image. But I still really like this shot. Mantas often hang out in bad viz, so I don't mind the odd manta shot in not less than perfect viz. Shot with the D850, 28 to 70mm and WACP1 again. Subal housing retro flashes. F14 1/60th of a second. I think I was just F14 on this one, just really to make sure I had everything sharp, because it was about foreground and background, and then ISO 400. Right. Moving now on to number 13 and over to Analau for a macro shot. And this is one of my favourite shots from that trip because it's quite a creative macro shot. Taken using the combination of a snooted strobe and a long exposure with panning with intentional camera movement. So shot with a D850, the 105mm lens, and a Fit Plus 5 close-up lens. One of my favourite close-up lenses. That it's a weak close-up lens but really good optical quality, and I've actually lost my one now, which I'm really sad about, and I think it's a real loss, and it's a real pity that there aren't more of those types of lenses around. Subal housing, retro flash, and obviously the snoot to create this lighting. Shot at f25, a fifth of a second, and ISO 80. What I like about this is obviously that the subject is sharp. It's the ghost goby on the sea pen, but I really like the textures created by the panning from the branches of the sea pen. I think it makes for a really attractive image. Some more long exposure blur type shots, but this time back in the Maldives, shot with the D850 28 to 70 and WACP1, Subal housing, retro flashes, shot on f14 at a 13th of a second. Generally I try to be somewhere between a 13th of a second and a quarter of a second when doing long exposure shots with blur. It's a good amount of time to create blur without it being so long that it's uncontrollable. You tend to get images more consistently in that sort of range, and then ISO 64 to allow me to shoot at a 13th of a second and not overexpose the environment. And this picture here is taken by zooming the lens during the exposure, and I just really like the sort of impressionistic look it gives to this school of big eyes, and it's always been a favourite shot since I've shot it. I think probably if I put this list together in 2019, this picture would have probably been in the top 5, but pictures age, and actually probably the picture it would be in the top 5 instead of, and probably swap places with, is the photo of the ghost pipefish from the wildlife. That was a category winner in the wildlife photographer, and obviously once one of your pictures becomes a category winner in the wildlife photographer, you tend to think more highly of it than perhaps you did at the time. So probably at the time this would have been right up there, but because the other one got the gong, that one's now further up in the list. Over to Raja Ampat now, to one of the jellyfish lakes there. This is the jellyfish lake in Furundi. I forget the name of the island, but it's the one where with the very treacherous climb up and over the hill to get there. Taken with the D850 and the RS 13mm, and I think I took the 13mm in on this one simply because it was smaller and lighter to carry than carrying the 230 dome over the hill. I knew then I was not going to be able to do any split levels, but I thought that it was going to be easier to clamber over that mountain with just the small RS lens attached to the D850. Subal housing, obviously no flash. F14 1/200th of a second, ISO 250. What I like about this picture is first of all how the moon jellyfish looks in the sun, with sort of backlit by the sun. It looks fantastic, and I think it creates a really great focal point amongst all the golden jellies that are actually why you go into these jellyfish lakes. Jellyfish lakes are where you have these small limestone islands. They often create lagoons or pools in the middle that are isolated from the ocean, and you quite often get jellyfish developing in those areas, particularly these golden jellyfish, stingless jellyfish. This is a perfectly normal moon jellyfish. This and then the the lake, the jellyfish lake, the sea lake, is connected to the outer ocean through the porous rocks. And actually, this particular lake has got a very large tuna living in it, which must have swum in when it was a larval form or a small juvenile through the rocks, and it's been trapped in this lake ever since. So every now and again in this lake, you see this massive fish swim past you, which is quite disconcerting in quite murky water. Right. On to Marsa Naba now in Egypt, and I had some lovely dugong encounters. After running a Red Sea workshop, I stayed on for about 2 days extra at the end of the workshop, staying with Red Sea diving safari there. And Sarah O'Gorman actually took the picture of me photographing the dugong on the left there, shooting with the WACP. And I just sort of did 2 trips with the dugong and got good encounters on both trips. Shot it once with the WACP and once with the fisheye to give me a nice broad portfolio of images, and was really pleased with all the images that I got. You can see my yellow fins in the picture there. But I think this is my favourite picture with Sarah in it, actually. And this is a picture of the dugong, and I just like this shot because the dugong has just lifted up off the bottom feeding. It's got nice backlight coming around it from the sun. You've got Sarah in the background providing a bit of background interest. You've got the dugong, you've got the golden trevally, and I just think it's a very, very pleasing picture. And quite often you see these guys with their heads down in the sand, which is obviously an important behaviour like my previous shot. But I like this one because you can really actually see the animal. You can see him as he takes off over the seabed. And the number of dugongs does seem to be going up in Egypt, which is really, really good. They're not easy to encounter, they don't, but there's a few up and down the coast around Marsa Alam in particular, but all the way up the Egyptian coast, all the way up to the Gulf of Suez, there are dugong populations, and really nice to see. I don't think I did the settings for this. D850. This was the fisheye, so with the 8-15, and the 8-15 is always at 15 mil. I use that lens because it's optically very good, but I never zoom it. I never even travel with the zoom gear. Subal housing, CCAM flashes, f14, 1/60th of a second, ISO 320. I always enjoy shooting the anemone fish there, and there's always great opportunities. This is just a spine cheek anemone and a slightly bleached anemone, but this is my favourite shot. And this is a group of pink anemone fish in a magnificent sea anemone on dive site called Whale Rock, actually, and this anemone is still there. I've not been as lucky to see it balled up since this time, but I've swum past it many times going, I know you, from this photo here. This picture was taken at the beginning of 2019, and there was a strong current running, and that's what, and it was a cloudy day, I guess, and so and it was quite rough actually at the beginning of that trip. So the bubbles at the top of this picture are actually the waves breaking on the underside of the island. They're not diver bubbles, although they could be. They're pretty subtle in the picture. I just like this shot. It's such a beautiful shape, very classic close focus wide angle type picture. Lovely circular shape of the anemone that makes the picture. And then I just was waiting for the fish to line up, and eventually they lined up in this nice pattern. They're all going the same way because there was a whipping current whizzing through this area. You've got the nice soft corals behind, and the Melothea sea fan. Very pretty picture. Back to the Red Sea, and again on oceanic white shark trip that I ran, we do trips to see the oceanics and to see the long-nosed dolphins. I don't know if there's any dolphin picture in this. No, there isn't. And always provides great opportunities for photography if we get friendly oceanics. But this, I think, is my favourite shot of the trip, because this picture, these two were whizzing round. They were quite excited at this point, and there was a lot of luck involved in this composition, where I managed to get 2 of them in the frame. The picture is uncropped, and I wasn't looking through the camera while shooting this. It was shot blind, but when you shoot sharks a lot, you learn how to frame them up pretty well shooting blind. And the key thing is not to aim the camera at the eye, and that's what everyone does when they start shark photography. You have to, particularly in action times, you often shoot without looking through the camera. You learn to be able to aim the camera really well without looking, and you learn with the sharks that the key is to aim at the gills or at the dorsal fin or the pectoral fin as the central point in the frame, and that tends to keep the shark in the picture. If you aim the camera at the eye of the shark, you'll always cut the tail off, and you see so many pictures of sharks with the tail cut off, and that's because the photographers have done that. And I just really like the fact that this was very action-packed. I love that the rainbow light behind the eye of this oceanic, which is created by the refraction of the light through the surface. Just really, really nice feel to the water. Certainly to me, as someone used to being in the shallows of the sea, love seeing that light like that. And I really like the second shark. It just creates a lovely bit of background interest. I did shoot some mackerel on the trip, but I think and this was a shot I chose as my favourite from the year, simply because it's such a joyous image. The funny thing is that if it had been up to me, this picture would never have been taken, because during the workshop we'd set out for the day, and the plan was to dive the kittiwake first, then go and do a dive with silversides in the caves, second dive. We weren't expecting the silversides to be very good, so then third dive we were going to go back to the kittiwake. And what happened on this particular day is that when we completed that second dive with the silversides, I was like, ooh, the silversides are actually pretty good. They're better than we were expecting. I think we should stay here for a third dive, because it's quite hard to get silversides well, whereas the kittiwake will always be there. But because all the group had basically come with plans to do certain shots on the kittiwake, they all wanted to go back to the kittiwake. And so I very rarely would put something to a vote on the trip, but in this case here, because it was a change to the advertised plan, I put it to the vote, and pretty much everyone wanted to go back to the kittiwake. So I lost out on this occasion. We went back to the kittiwake. But I did actually, before we left, because we were still eating lunch, I missed my lunch, jumped in the water, and had 10 minutes using my third cylinder of air. So my cylinder for the kittiwake, I started using a bit of it to get an extra dive in, just with because I thought that the silversides were so good on the dive, and I was like, oh, we must, I'm going to go in and do 5-10 minutes before we go to the kittiwake while everyone finishes lunch. So I compromised my dive on the kittiwake. Because I compromised my dive on the kittiwake, I was then finished early on the kittiwake dive. And when everyone came back on board, it was such a lovely day. I had the idea to do this shot here, which is shot with the Matty Smith dome, the 1635 D850 Subal housing, shot at f20 so that everything is in focus, 1/320th a second, which is taking a risk, I have to say, on the shutter speed, but it was fine. ISO 640, and it's such a joyous picture. And this is just taken with a bunch of photographers. It would be a really nice shot to do. Really set up with sort of everyone in colour coordinated outfits and all sort of wearing the same thing. But I really like this shot. Ocean Frontiers have used it for a lot in their promotion. So that's the story behind it. So it's always remained a favourite with Jenny there in the middle, and obviously lots of friends in the picture: Paul, Nadia, Kathy, and I can see Arthur through the middle there. So yeah, really cool. Right, on to the next one. And back to Sri Lanka. And although the Sri Lanka trip was a blue whale trip, I think my favourite shot from that trip was actually wasn't a whale at all, or even a cetacean. It was a whale shark, and this very large whale shark was following the blue whales around, eating their poo basically. And we had a really nice encounter with it. The blue whales had passed us, had been to had defecated at the surface, and the whale shark had raced over to feed on the poo, and then afterwards we swam with it for a bit as it slowly sank back down into the depths again. And I got the chart, and it was a lovely flat calm day, and I got this lovely front composition as it dropped down below me. It was a really big shark, back down into the blue, and I just really love how the light wraps around it. It looks great in colour, but it looks particularly nice in black and white. Shot with the D850, the RS 13mm lens, Subal housing, f8, 1/320th ISO 500. Just for those that like the RS 13 lens, I just mentioned that I've converted all these apertures to the correct apertures. The RS 13 reports the wrong aperture, just the nature of the conversions on it. So these are the true apertures, not the displayed apertures when I'm going through these pictures, just anyone's watching that. Right, into the top 5. And this isn't in the top 5, but this was taken in Darwin, and one of the things I was working on that trip was experimenting and enjoying using vintage lenses. This is taken with a 50mm Oriston lens, creating sort of interesting bokeh and sort of slightly distorted look to images. And I really like this shot of this thorny seahorse on a sea pen. But this is a shot I have to pick out, which is taken with the 100mm Trioplan lens, Nikon D850, neutral density 4, ND4 filter, Subal housing, retro flashes, shot at f2.8, 1/250th of a second, ISO 80. I really like this picture because I think the effect is well managed. I've spoken about this picture a lot, so I won't go on about it. It was awarded as a category winner in the Wildlife Photographer of the Year, so it's become a very well known image. But I really like it because I think the use of the Trioplan is relatively subtle. I think a lot of the time people tend to use these lenses for the maximum showing of the effect that they can create, and I think the reason this picture was successful is actually the Trioplan is simply supporting what the image was trying to communicate about this animal and where it lived, this juvenile ghost pipefish, and the distortion of the crinoid. It's not completely distorted, and I think that's why the picture works. I think a lot of underwater photographers would shoot a shot like this where they'd want the crinoid completely blurred into a pattern and the subject completely sharp in front of it. But in that case there, you don't really have the same relationship between the subject and its environment. And I think it's that relationship that helped this picture work. So, top 4. This is what I did on that dive at the Kittiwake when we were doing dive number 3 on the Kittiwake. Nobody wanted to go back in and see these silver sides. I was very keen, so I just jumped in while everyone was finishing their lunch and had sort of 5-10 minutes in there, knowing that we had to get moving. So I was just whizzed down, did some shots. It's very shallow. This is a nice, and I was using rear curtain sync, and it creates this lovely spaghetti effect on the silver sides, which I really like. But I think this shot here is my favourite just because I love the layers and depth, and particularly this is a shot that the more you look at it, the more you see, and that there's so many tarpon in this picture, and there's so many layers in that picture, and I think it's quite hard in underwater photography to create images with lots of depth because of our reliance on flash photography that tends to create flatter foregrounds if we want them to be lit evenly, and it can be quite difficult to work in lots of depth, and this for me is a really lovely three-dimensional feeling wide angle shot. This was taken with D5, the 13mm RS fisheye, Subal housing, Seacam strobes, f14, a 13th of a second, ISO 320. So into the top 3, this is my third place favourite. This was taken in Darwin in the Philippines on the same trip as the previous the ghost pipefish. That's from the Wildlife Photographer, but I prefer this shot. It's a bit more of a classic shot. It's just a pair of yellow pygmy gobies. We normally photograph these living in man-made structures. They really love, old bottles and things like that to live in. So it's quite rare you see them living in a natural subject. And these two were living in an old sea urchin test. And they're looking out through this hole, and I just love the shape of the composition. It's kind of this lemon-shaped opening in the sea urchin, and just the personality that comes out from these two, one of them looking worried, one of them looking sort of mean and aggressive, I think adds a huge amount to this relatively simple composition. But yeah, it's remained one of my favourite shots, taken with the D850, the 105mm lens, SMC1 close-up lens, Subal housing, retro flashes, f32, 1/250th, ISO 100. Right, number 2 is picture from the Thistlegorm. This was the final shoot on the Thistlegorm before our Thistlegorm book, so I spent most of these dives photographing random objects for very small pictures for the book, but I did take a few pictures I like. This is an off-camera strobe shot of the of one of the Watt 3 trucks in the lower hold of the Thistlegorm, a truck we shoot a lot. You can shoot it horizontally or vertically like this. I like this one with the off-camera lighting and all the fish, and particularly because it's got a very nice background with that opening in the hold. But this is my favourite Thistlegorm shot from that year. It's a shot I've done before. In fact, I've shot the backlit motorbike a few times, but I think this is probably my favourite shot that I've taken of it. It's not the one that gets seen the most because the older version is it's in my underwater photography masterclass book. It's on the cover of the Thistlegorm book, the older shot. But I think I prefer this shot. I probably didn't process it in time for the Thistlegorm book because we already had it. It wasn't a priority photograph. But I really like this. The RAS, the Abu Jubdi, however you pronounce it, RAS, up at the top there, and it just got really nice beams on the motorbike. This was taken with the D5 8 to 15mm lens, Subal housing, the one underwater flash guns that I was using on this trip, and I use them for my off-camera lighting. You always want to have your most powerful flash guns as your off-camera lighting. F11, 1/250th of a second, so I wanted it to be dominated by the strobe light, not the ambient light, and then ISO 2000. And to my favourite shot of 2019, certainly as I look back on them now, is this split level of a sunset split taken in Egypt. Now, we do sunset splits on all my workshops, and much of the time I don't bother even going in to do them because I've shot them so many times, and they're wonderful pictures. But we always go the best reefs for doing them, which have corals at the right depth, which are facing the right way for the sun, and are sheltered from the windy desert sea, because the Red Sea is always windy. You need to find that sheltered water. Means that you have limited options, so I often don't go in and shoot them. But on this day, the wind was blowing from a really strange direction. It was blowing from the south rather than from the north, and so instead of shooting on the south side of the Ras Sid peninsula where we normally do them, it was too rough there, so we actually went round to the north side of the peninsula. It's kind of a dive site area called Fiasco, and I guess it's named that because normally it's quite rough there, but on this particular day it was nice and calm, and I was able to shoot these there's lots of nice corals on the edge of the wall there, the fringing reef wall that runs along the coastline, and this was a really nice corally bit, and fortuitously it had these really nice palm trees in the background, and these aren't wild palm trees. There aren't any wild palm trees in the desert. This is actually part of the Renaissance Hotel that's on that peninsula, and they've planted these palm trees along the beach, but they make for a great background for this split level shot. So I think this picture was just really made by the fact it was nice corals and a really great background, and one that won't be that easy to repeat because it's so rarely calm on this area. So taken with the D850 8 to 15mm lens, like so many of these shots have been. This was taken with the Matty Smith dome again, which you saw in that picture of me and Isa at the beginning of the talk, and I also used that dome for the shot of Jenny and the gang jumping off the back of the dive boat. Subal housing, the one underwater flashes that I was using on this trip. F16, which I don't think was the best aperture. I was trying to see with the Matty Smith dome if I could push the aperture a little bit more open and still get sharpness both underwater and above, and I think the palm trees in this are not quite as sharp as they could be, and I'd have probably been better to go to F18, F20, and then they would have been perfectly sharp, the palm trees. But they're sharp enough to work in this shot, I have to say, but they're not as sharp as they probably should be, and that was just me actually, because I wasn't expecting much from this dive, and I said, okay, I'm going to go in and do some sunset splits and just experiment with apertures a little bit. And it's very hard to judge that sharpness on the back of the camera. You really need to download the pictures. So yeah, there is a kind of a mistake in this shot. 1/125th of a second to get that sunset exposed, and then ISO 400. So that is a run through of my favourite pictures from 2019, which was, I think, a very productive year. So many nice pictures, so many pictures I couldn't include on that. I actually, when I came to look through and pick these 20, I looked how many photos that I've processed and processed at full res, captioned, keyworded, and are on my website now from that year, and it's 772. So it was an incredibly productive year of underwater photography for me, and those are just my top 20 with a few introductory shots around them. So I hope you enjoyed that. See you again soon.